I have a revelation. So, recently I saw some of Mikey 17, right? It's with Robert Pattinson and that other actress who she's a black actress, but I don't know her name. I think she's like a newcomer. Anyway, I looked at that film and I didn't see all of it, but I was like, that's interesting. What was interesting about it? Well, I look at a lot of sci-fi films. My favorite sci-fi film is Alien, right? With Savarna Weaver. But I noticed a pattern within this genre where there will always be a specific race that would be leading within this particular type of trope, I guess, or storytelling. Every single time I would look at people get out of pods, whether the captain is black, whether the side characters are black or POC, which is mostly the case, there will always be a framing of the story around a white protagonist. The people that are mostly making the ships, the people that are mostly, building are white people. Now, they would add in some of these stories, they would have like, a generalized Asian country, a generalized, accent from this particular place, right? That kind of fills in the gaps of saying it's not only white people, right? You have to sprinkle out a little bit of different types of ethnicities and races within that particular framing of that world in order to make a little bit more sense of society having to leave the planet to go to a different kind of, space, right? To go to space. To find another civilization, you have to have a representation of civilization. But even with that, even with the addition of everybody else around, the protagonist, for the most part, will always be white. Now, the protagonist could have a love interest that is black, a love interest that is Asian, Hispanic, could have, various different types of people on the ship that are people of color, which is something that I've noticed within a lot of sci-fi films, right? Like they'll have like one big black guy, they'll have like a lesbian white woman, they might have like an Indian or a Middle Eastern on the ship, and it'd be like a ragtag crew on the ship, and they're all doing this whole thing, and then one by one, you show their personalities and trauma, and they die, right? It's like a whole trope within sci-fi. But the main protagonist, the final girl, right, the person that makes it in the end, is always a white woman or a white man. And I find it interesting because even within a whole type of genre that is dependent upon showing various different people for various different types of backgrounds coming together to try to fight, to try to see a new world. The person that's always highlighted in the end, whether intentionally or unintentionally by the director, is a white person. And I just think that that's so interesting. I don't know why. Well, I do know. I can make an inference that it has something to do with white supremacy, or maybe the fact that the people who are making these movies and shows, they're doing, some of the things that every other group of people would want to do within their media, and that's have people that represent them. But again, it is something that I realize is a trope within a lot of sci-fi films and TV shows. Even with Love, Death, and Robots, I think this particular season, one of the episodes, there was a white woman, and she was lost at the ship on, and a lot of her people got massacred. And she was talking to this alien on the ship, and it was a whole exchange. And then he gave her like this little fuzzy pet thing, and then at the end, basically, she was like, I'm tired, you've been good, you can eat me now. And then the little pet thing ate her, and it was a whole thing. It was weird. But people who looked at Love, Death, and Robots and looked at the most recent season of that particular episode, and I remember looking at it, loving the animation, loving the the different types of things that were going on. But I was like, I've seen this before. One of the episodes that I've seen, and it's one of the most iconic episodes of the recent seasons of Love, Death, and Robots, is where you had two people that were getting onto a ship, and they were going on to like this avatar type thing where they were like, I don't know, it was weird. It was like a weird setup. But anyway, they get onto a ship, and there's these two hot attractive white people. It's like animation, like live action, and they basically they're talking about life, memories. And then we find out, like, a big moment is that the ship been crashed. It went into like this big like colony-esque thing, and that the woman that the man was talking to was actually this alien, right? It was like this pink little alien. And there was this moment on Love, Death, and Robots. It's a pretty like iconic scene where the alien kind of changes from a woman's silhouette to like this weird kind of alien flesh like thing. And then this like older white dude who's like sick is like sitting there trapped on there because basically the woman or the entity affects the person's mind to make them hallucinate, right? And I realized while looking at that, I was like, there goes another white person. I know it's crazy to see things by race, but I couldn't ignore it because I kept seeing it over and over and over and over again. It made me think of all these other types of films that I've liked, these paranormal films or these films about children with special powers. I said, every time I look at the children with special powers, I can always count on the fact that it's going to be a white girl or a white boy. I told myself, what would happen if would the optics change if it was an Indian child, if it was a Japanese child, if it was a child who was Hispanic, if it was a child who was black? Would the optics change? Would the audience receive it the same way as, oh, that makes sense that that particular child has telekinesis or has the ability to see through walls or has the ability to teleport or do all of these various different types of things beyond themselves, these fantastical elements of life? Do they have this ability? Or is that just not something that they would do, even if this is based in fantasy? It reminds me of the fact that, you had Lord of the Rings, and they were doing a reboot, or I think it was Game of Thrones. I believe it was both, but I don't know. Both are kind of in the Middle Earth kind of genre, and how they had started to introduce black people, right? And some people loved it. They were like, oh, this is great, this is cool. They had their critiques, they had their likes, the whole thing. But there was a good amount of people that were outraged, right? They were outraged. Oh my gosh, why do we sing black people? This makes no sense. This is about Greek mythology. This is about Viking mythology. This is about, the different things with Europeans. This has nothing to do with black people. Get them out of here! It was like crazy. And I think I kind of realized that in Western media, that there will always be this battle within, white representation. It's the same stuff I said on the other video where I said there's this whole push of interracial, but yet it's not really interracial. It's just a white person with a person of color. And people gag every time. I'm like, but in a way, isn't that reinforcing something that has always been the foundation of cinema itself, that whiteness is the default? Because why couldn't it be with another person of color? Why couldn't it be with somebody who is a different ethnic group who just so happens to be the same race? Like, if we're going to do multiculturalism, let's do multiculturalism. But a lot of the things that we do, even if it's built in a fantastical world, even though it's built in fantasy, is still built around the white gaze and white proximity. And I don't know, I started to look at it more and more, and now every single time I look at media, I'm kind of waiting for it, right? And it's not I wouldn't say it's a good way to live, but I'm kind of just sitting there like, okay, what other white person are we going to have to put in? And Get Out, of course, that was his hit film in the horror genre. And of course, there was a whole thing about a black man dealing with a white family and the racism and all these other different things that were going on in it. Even in Black Panther film, you had to have that one white dude who happened to be a good white guy who was helping all of the black people because that would kind of make white people feel better. And I just think that there's a conditioning there. I think that there's a form of manipulation there. And again, I'm not saying that it's in bad intent. I'm not saying that every single white person behind closed doors is like, we must do it. Maybe they do see it from a white liberal mindset or a viewpoint. But I do see a lot of the media, especially within the fantasy world, especially within the sci-fi world, where it's like, oh my goodness, everything is still surrounded around you and around how you see it and around your survival and your fears. And everybody else is kind of just pushed in there with you to kind of give the illusion of progress. But it's happened already. We've had black people on TV shows like Star Trek. We had a lot of different types of films where there were black people in the same space and vicinity of white characters. Back in the day, that was groundbreaking. But in the 2020s, it's like, okay, you did it in the 19 whatever, you did it in the 70s, the 60s, you did it in the 80s, you did it in the 90s, you did it in all these other eras, right? And in those earlier eras, that was, but now it's like, let's move on, like, let's, right? But it keeps happening. I keep saying, the people who are the default of humanity, the people who are the default of seeing things in various different types of civilizations are white people. What's that about?